Okay, this is Chuck Lavazzi with KDHX in St. Louis, coming from my home in St. Louis, and with me here via Zoom from his home on the Upper West Side of New York is Ari Axelrod. Ari, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Chuck. How are you?
Yeah, I am good. And you seemed, we were just discussing the fact that you are just moving into your new place.
Yes. I just completed the moving process 2 weeks ago, but that is my dresser that I need to put together. I am the least handy person on planet Earth, so it has stayed there for a couple of days. One day I'll get around to it, but for right now, it's on the wall in a box.
Yeah. You're not the least handy person on earth while I'm still alive, but, you know.
Chuck, we have a lot of things in common, but I've just found something else we have in common. It's maddening doing those projects. I'm sure there are people who absolutely love doing it, but that is not where I thrive.
Yeah. As far as things in common are concerned, of course, you and I have both been at the cabaret conference. That's where we met. And I covered your first show here in St. Louis in 2016, Taking the Wheel, which I liked a lot.
Thank you. Thanks.
Very well done. And we both had a near-death experience, which not many people can actually share. And but let's not talk about that because I really, or maybe we can do that later. But right now, I'd like to talk about the show you've got coming up
Sure.
at New Jewish Theater here in St. Louis on October 16th and 17th. And it's Jewish Broadway,
Yeah.
which seems to me to be kind of redundant since
Yes, I often say my show is titled A Celebration of Jewish Broadway, or more accurately, A Celebration of Broadway.
yes,
I think,
because so many of the great composers were Jewish.
right, and those that weren't knowingly took inspiration from Jewish songs that they heard. Cole Porter did that. Lin-Manuel Miranda, he took a lot of inspiration from the Jewish composers that came before him, like Sondheim and Jason Robert Brown. So even when a non-Jew writes a musical, they can't escape the Jewish influence.
Right.
Why should they?
Why indeed? And so give us a little idea about the shape of the show. I mean, are you going to do a kind of historical overview? Because Jewish American influence in theater goes back a long way.
It does. So I'll tell you how the show came to be.
Okay.
I was invited to speak for a group of students that were from Eastern Michigan University. I was invited by my friend Marty Schichtman, who was the head of the Jewish Studies Department at Eastern Michigan. This is back in the spring of 2018 that I spoke to them. And it was a group of students that were all on a trip to New York. I was talking to them about my life and about, my experience as an actor in New York, my experience as a Jew in New York. And Marty and we grabbed a drink after the talk back, and he loves West Side Story as much as I do. I almost said almost as much, but he is one of the few people that loves it as much as I do. My Bobby being the other person. And, I was talking about the Jewish influence on West Side Story and just kind of kept, and did you know this? And actually, fun fact, did you know this? And he said, after like 15 minutes of me monologuing about, the Judaism embedded in all of that show, he said, you should really do a show about the Jewish influence in musical theater. And in my time at Webster, I was one of the only Jewish people in the department, and certainly actually, it was the only outspoken Jewish person in the way that I was outspoken. And so my pride in my Jewish identity was met with a lot of friction. And so to hear that I should do a show about the Jewish influence on musical theater, my first reaction was no one would want to come. Why would anyone? No, like it just no one would want to come. And he said, well, I would. So why don't you do this? Why don't you bring your show, which I hadn't built yet, obviously. Bring your show to Eastern Michigan in October. I thought, okay. So I had been fascinated with this subject matter for years. Because it's the two things I love more than anything, aside from my dog, who's asleep on the couch right now.
Oh,
After Leonard Bernstein.
yes. Ours is asleep sitting on my wife's lap right now.
Of course, of course. I'll bring him over in a bit. But, Judaism and musical theater are the two things I love more than anything else in the world. And so, where they meet, where they intersect is, I think, the most beautiful thing on planet Earth. And so I've been fascinated by it. So I called Lena Katrakis, I think 3 days before I went to Eastern Michigan, and said, I have all of these songs and all of this information. I just need help coming up with a structure. So we sat in her living room and we built the show in an hour.
Oh, wow.
I know. And then
that's Lena.
I know. And then I did the show at Eastern Michigan. People kept coming up to me saying, you really should do this. The show has legs. It's like, I still don't get it. Well, I can't believe that there were 250 people here that wanted to see this and that they're telling me it has legs. It still just didn't quite make sense to me. And Birdland had just a few months earlier opened up their theater space in the basement. And it looked beautiful. And so I'd sent an email to Jim Caruso, Birdland, and saying I really want to, do a show in the theater space. And he said, well, what shows do you have? And I mentioned Taking the Wheel, which was directed by, Tony Award winner Faith Prince.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, these are the places I've done it. And he said, you've already done it at 2 other venues in New York. Are there any other shows that you have? And I said, well, last night I just debuted a show about the Jewish influence on musical theater, and still in my mind thinking, why no one would want to see this? It's, especially at a jazz club. And he said, awesome. How does January 2019 work for you? Oh, sure. So met with Lena, and music director at the time was Rick Jensen.
Oh, yeah. The late, sadly, Rick Jensen, yeah.
Correct. And we refined the show. It was originally very educational in its, there was very little underscoring and patter. It was just song,
Mm-hmm.
lecture, song.
Yeah.
Song. And so we turned it from an educational presentation with music to an artful storytelling. Did it at Birdland in January, sold out. Did it again in June, sold out. And then in November, I brought on a new music director who was my roommate. His name was Mike Stapleton, and we completely redid the show. We added completely new arrangements to everything. We added new facts. The world had changed at that point. When I first started doing the show, I believe it was before the Tree of Life synagogue shooting had happened. Yeah. While I was doing the show, with our former administration still in a position of power, anti-Semitism was exponentially on the rise. And so the tone of the show, I felt, had to change to reflect the tone of what it means to be a Jew in America and the world today. Mm-hmm. And then in November of 2019, I did it again at Birdland, and this time I had Tova Feldshuh as a featured performer. And
nice.
She did a whole, which was amazing. And that began what has become a really beautiful relationship that Tova and I have. And throughout, in between those 3 shows, sold out shows at Birdland, I did it in St. Louis at the Kranzberg, which Robert Bragg produced.
Mariposa Productions at that time,
correct.
Right?
I did.
And I sadly missed that, and now I'm glad I'm going to get to see it.
Yes, because again, this is a new. Once Mike Stapleton was brought on as the music director, it's become a show that is so special to me and one, I mean, it was always special to me because it's every single time I've done it, it's been sold out, which
Nice.
like still, I'm now understanding that people care about what I have to say as a Jewish performer. But it took a long time to understand that people would come. But after Mike came on board, I mean, he's also one of my closest friends. The arrangements that we did were they were built to reflect what it means to be a Jew today. And as much as I, you know, loved what we did with Rick and Lena, it was more meant at that time. It was more meant to showcase the work of these
Right.
composers without a focus on what it means to be a Jew today. And then when I brought Mike on, we were literally sitting in our apartment. We renting a piano, sitting in our apartment. And I was just like, this is what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And I want the music to reflect both the contributions of these brilliant composers and also personally what it feels like to be a Jew in this country today, what it feels like to be a Jew who loves Israel, to be a Jew who is scared, and what it means to be a Jew who celebrates their Jewish identity, even in spite of all of that. And so because of that, it is still very much at its core celebrating the influence, but because the influence is still happening, because the band's visit,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it, was just a few years ago, and so many musicals that are still coming out in a world that looks the way that it does. It felt important to me to have it also include that element. So I don't know if that answers your initial question, but
Oh, I think it does.
Oh, good. It's kind of how it came to be, and how it has ended up. And I say it because anyone that saw the show in St. Louis when I did it in 2019, you saw a different show.
It's a different show now, right? It's a different show because your point of view changed, and naturally that changes the show. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
well, and yeah, it's like it was Lena Kudrakos, I think, who, as far as talking about arrangements, said that a musical arrangement should be like a custom suit of clothes, tailored to fit you. And of course, as your point of view changed, the clothes had to change because you changed. So it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Right. I think it's art imitates life. I don't remember who said that, but art imitates life. And
I don't either.
but it's so true. And
especially in cabaret, it's very true.
Right. Well, because Dick Gallagher said, and it's my favorite definition of cabaret, which is cabaret is the art of being yourself on purpose.
Yeah.
So if art imitates life, and we are the people who live life, and I'm being myself on purpose, then I'm doing a disservice to my audience if how I am choosing to be myself on purpose does not reflect the life that I'm living in the world in which I am living, because then the art that I am offering is inauthentic at best.
Right. And this is the thing about cabaret. It's an intensely personal, artistic medium, and you really have no place to hide when you're a cabaret performer, as in fact we both know from personal experience.
Yes.
You really have to be genuine. And if you're not genuine, your audience is going to notice it and they're going to switch you off.
Totally. Yeah. So true.
And we should mention, I feel like I should footnote some of this for people who might not know all these names, but Lena Kudrakos, of course, is one of the legends of cabaret and a famous performer in her own right, and also a famous teacher who does cabaret workshops. Faith Prince, same thing, Broadway star. Faith Prince, who directed your original show, but also a terrific teacher. We've both taken from her, I think. And she's, again, one of these people who knows how to do her art and knows how to communicate her art. So you've worked with some really fine folks up to this point.
I have, and another person, which is Tova Feldshuh, who
Tova Feldshuh, yes, another big name in the
I
theater.
believe she is. I know that I don't remember if it's 4-time Emmy nominee and 2-time Tony nominee, or 4-time Tony nominee and 2-time Emmy nominee. But either
Who
way,
cares? Yes.
she is, the consummate professional when it comes to unabashedly and boldly bringing her Jewish identity to the work that she does, even when the roles that she is portraying are not Jewish, because she is who she is. It's hard to not appreciate and recognize the impact that she has had. The reason that I reached out to her, we had met briefly in passing once before, and I sent her this email that just said, I'm doing this show at Birdland, and this show would not be possible were it not for the work that you have done in your career, because you paved the way for future generations of Jewish performers to step into their Jewish identity and share it proudly, and I would be so honored to have you. And she was basically like, this is the best email I've ever received. It's a no-brainer. And then,
Yeah.
and we're still, very much collaborated a few times since then, even during the pandemic. And it's an honor to work with her, both as a performer, because watching her do anything is a masterclass, but also as a Jew, because she made it possible for this show to happen. I feel.
Okay. And I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh yeah, I know what I was going to ask. Excuse me, senior moment. So who are some of the songwriters and composers you're going to be representing in the show?
I will share 3 with you.
Okay.
Because I like to keep some of it a surprise. One of the things that's important to me about this show is that, like we mentioned before, there is so much ground to cover. There is so much to pick from.
Yeah.
That to fit it all into 14 to 16 songs, 60 to 75 minutes, it's impossible. But one of the things that was really important to me was to give audiences the songs that they expect to hear, and also songs that they didn't expect to hear. Songs that are not overtly Jewish. Like, sure, yes, there is some fiddler, but there is one song from Fiddler on the Roof. That's it. Because for me, I believe that when people hear Jewish Broadway, even if you're not Jewish and you're not a fan of Broadway, the first thing that will come into your mind is Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
But that scratches the surface. And
Barely, yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted to highlight songs that, even though the story that this song was written for is not a Jewish story, the song comes from Jewish liturgy. And its origins are from Saturday morning. So I like for some of those things to be a surprise, but I will give you 3. So we have Bach and Harnick.
Oh yeah.
Jerry Herman.
Mm-hmm. I love Jerry Herman. There's a legend, yeah.
And which I got my equity card doing a revival of Milk and Honey off Broadway at the York.
Oh, okay.
Which, again, thinking who would come, the idea that I got my equity card, starting the show on stage singing Madua enezim sheli chopshi lalechet barechov. Never thought that that's how it would be, that I would be cast in a role singing in Hebrew off Broadway with people I grew up listening to. Like, it just, again, it didn't compute. Now it's computing, but at the time it didn't. So yeah. Okay, Bach and Harnick, Jerry Herman, and my all-time favorite, which is Leonard Bernstein.
Oh yeah. The all-time favorite of many people, I would imagine. Yes.
Yes. Not just for his composing, and the music that he wrote, but how he one of the main pillars of Judaism is Lador Vador, which means from generation to generation. So essentially, if my ancestors were slaves in Egypt, then I too was a slave in Egypt. If my ancestors were in concentration camps, then I too was in a concentration camp. And Leonard Bernstein, when he conducted, he honored all of those composers who were Jewish and those maestros who were Jewish, who could not wear their Judaism on their sleeves when they took the stand. He conducted with extra Jewish angst to celebrate them. And to me, that's the most Jewish thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. So, it's no accident that that Bernstein was a legendary Mahler conductor, for example.
Correct.
And of course, Gustav Mahler was one of the great Jewish composers of the turn of the previous century. I mean, that's not coincidental.
No.
You mentioned Bernstein and West Side Story earlier, and I don't know how many people know this. You probably do, but of course, West Side Story originally was entitled East Side Story, and it was about, instead of Puerto Ricans and Anglos, it was a Jewish boy, I think, and a Catholic girl. Am I remembering that right?
I think so. I don't remember if it was a Jewish boy or a Catholic boy, and vice versa for the girl. But Jews and Catholics on the Lower East Side, and when they were originally writing it, I think, started writing it 10 years earlier, or several years earlier, and when they came back to the writing process, they realized that the demographic in New York City had changed. No longer the most applicable thing, and so they switched to West Side Story.
So there you are.
Which is where I am.
Which is where you are, yes, on the Upper West Side.
But when I sit, there's the dog.
Oh, there's the dog. Okay.
But when I sit here and I FaceTime with people, I feel like Tony and Maria will just behind me.
Right there, yes, on the fire escape.
Yes, and this is my dog Leo, who is named after Leonard Bernstein, whom I have right up there.
Ah, yes, there he is.
There he is.
It's a great picture, too.
You've seen so much of my apartment, Chuck. And all those of you who are watching this in the future.
Everybody on YouTube who's watching this,
right? Which
we hope is a number of people. That's So that's what we can expect with this show. I got to ask this though. And one of the things I said at the very beginning of the interview is, one of the things we have in common is this near-death experience thing. I mean, how do you think that has influenced your work and your outlook on life? I know how it affected mine, but this is about you.
I just got chills because I don't know that I've been asked that question in an interview about this show specifically. It's a really, really good question. So for those of you who don't know, which I'm going to assume is many of you who are watching this, when I was in college, I was diagnosed with, it was found that I had this thing called the Chiari malformation, which is essentially my brain was too big for my skull. So my brainstem was pushing down into the hole where the brainstem and the spine meet. 1 to 4 millimeters is fine. 5 millimeters is worrisome. And 5 millimeters of protrusion of the brain is when surgery becomes an option. And mine was 30 millimeters. So I had total numbness on the left side of my body. I had really bad vertigo, all this stuff. Living was very uncomfortable. It was very painful. It was hard for me to sit still. It was hard for me to sleep, hard for me to swallow, awful headaches. And this was all happening while I was at the conservatory at Webster. And I had surgery on May 11, 2015, right beginning of the summer between my junior and senior year. I was supposed to do a production of Oklahoma at a summer stock in Montana, but I pulled out of the contract because I didn't know if I was going to live or not. And surgery was on a Monday. By Tuesday night, I was just taking Tylenol for the pain. I was home by Thursday. And a week later, I went out for breakfast. I went out to eat at a restaurant. A month later, I was singing again in public in a concert. And 2 months after surgery, I met Chuck at the cabaret conference because
Yes.
Neil Richardson said, I know that you were going to do Oklahoma, and now you have an abundance of free time on your hands because you survived and have nothing on your schedule. I think you should look into doing the cabaret conference. And so I did. And one of the things that having surgery highlighted for me, which I didn't understand, is, to quote Brene Brown, time is our most precious non-renewable resource.
Yes.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yes.
And what I have come to realize is that to be alive is a passive state of being. To be alive is that's given. If you're breathing, you are alive. But to live
is an active. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I realized shortly after I had surgery was that I had the choice to merely survive and continue to be alive, or I could make the decision every single day to consciously choose to live again and again.
Yes.
Every single day. And one of the ways that I do that is, at the end of the day, I have a journal, and I write in my journal, what is something that I did today that reminded me that I was living?
Oh, that's good.
Thank you. It's one thing to be like, I'm choosing to live again, but it's another thing to hold myself accountable and actually take stock. And you look, okay, well, what was one thing that I did today that reminded me that I was living?
You're making me think I should steal that.
Nay, my wish is that everybody steals it, and you don't have to have a near-death experience to live life that way.
No.
In fact,
it's better if you don't have to have one first.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so one of the things, I talked about this at the beginning of the interview, and actually throughout, that I really didn't think that anyone would want to see me talk about my Jewish passion and musical obsession for musical theater and where they intersect. And that thought came from a place of fear and imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And what I have learned in doing this show is that it is so, I almost said a swear word, but it is so important for me to celebrate this stuff. It's so important. Legacy has become huge for me because I know what it was like at 21 years old to feel like a milk carton with a potential expiration date slapped across my forehead. We all know that eventually we're going to die, but for people who don't have an intimate relationship with their own mortality, it feels like this kind of nebulous truth of the universe that is not personal. But once a doctor says you're going to have brain surgery on May 11, 2015, there it is. Potential expiration date, May 11, 2015. And so then to make it to May 12, 2015, it's like, okay, now what's important to me? What is worth my time? And that's what I'm going to invest in. And when it's not worth my time, I harbor no ill will, but it can just, as Faith says, step to the rear, grist for the mill. And so what became really, really clear to me is what I do with my life. I want to make sure, again, going back to Jewish principles, that it has roots in tikkun olam, which is basically to repair the world, to heal the world. And we heal the world not so that it's a better place for us while we're here, but that it's a better place for future generations. And for me, I felt so alone at Webster as one of the only Jewish people. And so by doing this show and taking it around the country and highlighting the Jewish influence and continuing the legacy of these Jewish composers and paving the way for future, doing what Tova did, paving the way for future generations of Jews and also Jewish performers to own their Jewish identity, to me, is the ultimate way to live my life. I actually can't think of a more important way to live life and a more important reason to get up in the morning and do what I do and inform why it is that I do it. And that was never clear to me before. It was easier at the time to deny my Jewish identity.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when it is very, very difficult to proudly and loudly speak about what it means for me to be a Jew in today's world. But because I beat death at 21, as hard as it is, it's not that hard.
Yeah. So there's an obvious through line here to me, just talking to you, from that all the way through taking the wheel to Jewish Broadway. And I think we can probably expect to hear that when you do it at New Jewish Theater. This is on the 16th and 17th of October, 2021. I have no idea when people are watching this. But if it's before then, they can still get tickets by going to the New Jewish Theater website. Where are you doing it in the, which theater are you doing it in there? Is it the main one?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. The auditorium. All right. That's at the Jewish Community Center here in St. Louis County. So Ari, that sounds like a really great show, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I'm going to be there on your second show, and we have KDHX. I have a critic going there on your opening night, Laura Cairo. So
Wonderful.
Look forward to seeing it.
Yes, I look forward to seeing you. It's been too long.
Yes, I will be there, rest assured. And anyway, signing off then for my video blog. This is Chuck Lavazzi from KDHX talking to Ari Axelrod. See you next time on YouTube.